A presidential message. President Trump will deliver his State of the Union tomorrow night, and the White House is telling Fox Business the speech will highlight the administration's economic policies. Joining us now is Dan Henninger from the Wall Street Journal. He is also a Fox News contributor. I don't know how much political news we can jam into 1 week. We're going to have the caucus, and then we have even more on impeachment, and then the president's going to give his State of the Union. I know you're going to be watching Nancy Pelosi over the president's shoulder during the State of the Union. But what else will you be looking for?
Well, I think, the White House is putting out that this is going to be a State of the Union speech dedicated to the president's accomplishments. You know, Las Vegas, the bookmakers have got to be taking odds on whether or not the president at some point rips in to the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi over the impeachment. And my guess is that he will not, that he will really rise above it and talk about his accomplishments. So let's keep in mind the Democrats, especially with the impeachment, are trying to run against Donald Trump, the head of the evil empire, rather than Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, who in fact has been doing things while he's been in office. And while they want to run against the evil empire, I think President Trump probably is going to stand up there and describe a president who has been at work the past 3 years. Yeah,
I mean, in the past when they've tried, he'll say like record low African-American unemployment and they'll try not to clap. And you're like, how are you not clapping for that? It seems like it's a good thing for a constituency that you claim to represent. It'll be interesting to see their reaction. He'll talk about the economy. What else do you think he'll hit on?
Well, I think he'll talk about the economy. He will talk about jobs, indeed, the extraordinarily tight jobs market, what it's done for people. I think he'll talk about deregulation of energy, healthcare, the contributions that deregulation have made to the stronger economy. He's probably going to talk about the subject of his ad during the Super Bowl, which is people who are in jail and prison have been let out, their sentences reduced. He probably will talk about immigration, the wall, and he'll certainly talk about the trade deal, the Phase 1 trade deal with China and with Mexico and Canada. I mean, he'll be a long list of things that I believe will add up to a president that has been at work doing real things, contrary to what the impeachment proceedings have given the impression.
In spite of how much, Democrats have tried to stop him. Meanwhile, targeting the rich, Michael Bloomberg unveiling a $5 trillion plan aimed at corporations and wealthy Americans. The proposal would impose a 5% tax on incomes over $5 million a year and reverse President Trump's tax cuts. This is not the Mike Bloomberg we knew here in New York City. Now he really does want to punish people who make money.
That's precisely the point, Melissa. Look, this is a big reality check for a lot of people who you do run into individuals say they want to stop after 4 years at Donald Trump. Maybe they can get off that train. Mike Bloomberg would be an alternative. Look, Mike Bloomberg's tax plan suggests the extent to which left-wing ideology has taken over the Democratic Party. He himself is calling it a quote-unquote progressive tax plan. And this is only the opening bid. I mean, raising taxes on the rich, putting capital gains up to ordinary tax rates, lowering the threshold on estate taxes. If the Democrats gain in Congress at all, they will increase the taxation that Mike Bloomberg is proposing. And I would add one more thing. Climate change is one of Mike's big issues, and sitting behind climate change is the likelihood of a carbon tax. Add a carbon tax somehow onto what he's already proposing, and you're talking about a lot of new taxation.
Yeah, I think we'll leave the country, Dan. Thank you.